Good afternoon, and welcome to this afternoon's TMA Turnaround Square webinar, Not Your Parents' Article 9 Restructuring. We're going to do this in two parts today. The first part we'll talk about what is and what is not what we're going to talk about in terms of the Article 9 restructuring from a traditional Article 9 sale. And in the second half, we're going to see the process that actually occurred when Robert Donazzi of Second Wind and Johnny Mueller of Lippis Mathias met at the TMA Northeast Regional Conference in Saratoga and started talking about a case which developed into the case study that we'll talk about later. So truly a better together story. Let me do a couple of housekeeping things first. The first is 1.8 CEU and CPE credits and 1.5 CLE credits in Illinois are available for this webinar. And I'll be giving codes during the webinar, so you can keep track of that. And if you need materials to self-submit for CLE credits, please email education@turnaround.org. If you have questions during the webinar, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them either as we go through the different sections of their presentation today, or we will get to them at the very end. We'll leave time at the end. So I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel. I'm Sally Barton from Second Wind Consultants, and thrilled to have this group of very talented and experts in their fields join us today. I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Justin.
Well, Sally, thank you. And first of all, it's a pleasure to be here among such a distinguished group. I'm a veteran special assets banker and financial advisor. I currently manage the special assets group at Carter Bank, a Southeast Regional Commercial Bank, where I also serve in a senior credit role. I also have the distinction of having worked with Adam Duso of Second Wind on one of his first Article 9 so-called structured exit deals over a decade ago. And I find the construct to be compelling.
Annette?
Yes, I'm Annette Jarvis. I'm the managing shareholder with the Salt Lake City office of Greenberg Traurig. I'm a insolvency and bankruptcy restructuring lawyer, been practicing for a long time, and do primarily work with lenders and also with debtors. So both sides of what is new kind of revisioning or new envisioning of Article 9 restructuring is all about. So glad to be here today with this great panel.
Jason?
Thank you, Sally, and thanks again for the invitation to participate. Justin and Annette said it well. This is a great opportunity to really delve into some of the mechanics and how to structure a transaction using a great tool. I'm the CEO of KCP Advisory Group, which is a turnaround and restructuring practice with offices in Dallas, Chicago, Boston, and New York. We do turnaround restructuring. We try to find creative solutions like you're going to hear about today. We also do forensic accounting, litigation support, due diligence, and performance improvement for our clients.
Thanks, Jason. Adam?
Adam Duso. I'm the CEO of Second Wind Consultants. I have spent the last 15 years working at Second Wind, trying to perfect a process of leveraging Article 9. So my experience is very focused towards this area. And like I said, thanks to Sally and everyone at TMA for putting this together. It's an honor to be here.
And Johnny?
Mueller. I'm a partner and co-leader of the financial restructuring team at Lippis Mathias. I sit in Buffalo, but work with the offices throughout the country. Kind of been a long time TMA member and former chapter president for Upstate, and how I got to know most of the folks on this amazing panel, Sally and everybody, and just a pleasure to be here and to be able to kind of share the real life experience that I went through and how it worked out well for us. So look forward to talking with everybody.
Thanks, Johnny. And I'm Sally Barton. I've been a longtime TMA member. I was a career banker for a number of years, first on the lending side, and then the last 20 years in workout at Key before joining Second Wind about a year ago. I'm a director of special asset solutions, which means I get to talk to all of you guys, financial advisors, attorneys, bankers, to help explain this process. And then my role as a process goes through is really to represent the interests of the senior secured lender, where I've spent most of my career. So again, it's a thrill to be here. Honored to do things with TMA, as I've been a long time volunteer and board member. So appreciate the opportunity. So let me level set with everybody to start off, because when people think about Article 9, they think about I think they think about the way that I've always thought about it. You know, as I was a lender and a company handed me their keys and said, "I'm done. Here's all the stuff. Go do whatever you want to do." You know, the lender would typically go in and hire an auctioneer to sell off the stuff, and that was the end of the case. That is not what we're going to talk about today. We're also not going to talk about a sale of a company when you've got a company that's looking to sell, a buyer that's looking to buy, and a senior secured lender that's going to get paid in full. And all they're doing is looking at a way to do a transfer of ownership of the business. We're not going to talk about that. We're also not going to talk about a strict foreclosure with an uncooperative company. What we are going to talk about is a distressed business. So probably they have more debt than they can service. They don't have enough cash at the end of the month to pay their bills. They probably are now experiencing collateral shortfalls. Maybe they have, sold inventory and not replaced it, and they've used that money to continue to operate over, whatever period of time, so they can continue just staying in business. We're going to talk about those situations, those distressed businesses, those examples that are a good use for when an Article 9 restructuring can be used. And so the way we're going to refer to Article 9 restructuring today is really a prepackaged out-of-court resolution process, which creates incentives for all the stakeholders to avoid a judicial process that can be costly, that can be very time-consuming. And instead of utilizing that judicial process, we utilize the Uniform Commercial Code, or UCC. So that's what we're talking about today. Let me turn it over to Adam, and he can kind of walk us through a Article 9 restructuring in its simplest form.
Thanks, Sally. So as Sally said, Article 9 is traditionally used as a liquidation tool. In an Article 9 restructuring, the goal is to align the incentives of the four major parties that are typically involved in every transaction. That includes the senior secured lender, typically a bank, the current business owner or owners, depending on what the cap table looks like, the incoming purchaser who wants to purchase the business as a going concern, and usually an incoming lender to help fund that purchase and working capital needs for NewCo, with the exception of if it's a cash transaction. By aligning all of those incentives, you can allow a surrender of the collateral over to the lender to allow this process to occur. The debtor, the way you do that is the debtor provides consent, and through a surrender of collateral based on a predetermined outcome of what the disposition of collateral. So meaning that a buyer is identified, a purchase price is agreed upon, and then the debtor surrenders so that the transaction can happen smoothly without the need for forceful liquidation.
Mhm.
The bank is typically incentivized to do this because the surrender and the prepackaged nature allows them to do a few different things. One is preserve the ongoing concern of the business to the extent that there is one, so that they're getting a value at the purchase price that exceeds just the value of the assets. Additionally, if while doing this while a business still has going concern, allows the bank an opportunity to potentially recover additional recovery through the new entity through an arrangement that is done while we're prepackaging this sale. So that provides the bank's incentive. And a purchaser is identified because, you know, a process is run, a value is identified, and a strategic purchaser typically is brought in for a private sale transaction. There are two forms of the Article 9. There are several forms of the Article 9, but the two main subsets are a private sale or a public sale. Private sales are typically preferred because you can run a process that identifies the strategic purchaser that does not want to have the opportunity to go to the public and therefore is willing to pay more for that opportunity. However, there is a public provision of it if there is not that identified strategic party. If you are running a private sale, it's important that minimum consideration is determined by a third-party appraisal, and then as long as you meet or exceed that value, a private sale can conclude. If you are going a public sale, the commercially reasonable nature of the sale means as long as you publish the sale and make a good faith effort to bring it to market, third-party appraisal is not as necessary. As we discussed earlier, banks are often incentivized to do this because selling a going concern and then looking to collect out of a new co a portion or all of the deficiency balance is a more attractive recovery path than trying to recover from an over-leveraged business that has insufficient assets to cover the outstanding secured liability to that bank. So what a prepackaged Article 9 sale allows is with the help of typically a financial advisor, the company is evaluated based on what its future performance can be, and that's where a portion of the previous deficiency can, in certain cases, be brought over into the new entity under the eye of a financial advisor, so that that new sub-debt becomes performing on a predetermined schedule. For incoming senior lenders, they originally may have wanted to fund this business, but because of the capital stack on the assets, there was no way to get in first position and refinance all the existing debt. After an Article 9 is completed, they're funding into a new entity that is receiving those assets free and clear of all the subordinate liens. The asset sale happens. So anyway, that allows that ABL opportunity to occur where it wouldn't otherwise, and allows that bank takeout to an ABL to occur where that wouldn't otherwise, maintaining those ongoing bank referral relationships for asset-based lenders. And then after the proper notice period, so again, the process for an Article 9 is the debtor is incentivized to surrender the collateral. Typically, that is allowing them to earn out of the new entity as an employee, or maybe have a path to earn back in to the new entity that provides their incentive. The bank is incentivized by a streamlined out-of-court process that maximizes value and maybe allows them to recover additional deficiency from the new entity. The buyer is incentivized by a purchase price that is attractive and still being able to buy as an ongoing concern. And an asset-based lender was able to make a loan in first position that they weren't otherwise. Once all of that is aligned, the notice period, the bank sends a notice, depending on what form of the Article 9. It is at least needs to be a 10-day notice. In certain cases, if it's a public sale, it will be as much as 30 days. At the end of that notice period, the first position senior secured lender can sell the assets to the purchaser free and clear of any subordinate liens and encumbrances that were previously on the assets. In the new co, the incoming ABL takes the first position liens on assets divorced of all previous junior liabilities. The bank, the previous senior lender, has subordinated some or all of its deficiency balance as a subnote below the ABL with the expectation of recovery based on performance or a takeout event such as a recapitalization or sale. So rather than the bank just walking away for asset value and having to chase the guarantor for deficiency balances, this prepackages both the front end of the disposition of collateral and the back end, which is addressing the deficiency balance, while also allowing for an attractive entry price for a purchaser and a streamlined exit for the existing ownership.
And Adam, if I might add, there's also often an opportunity for the incumbent bank lender, if the takeout ABL lender is a non-bank entity, to maintain the deposit relationship as well as have a deficiency subnote lottery ticket.
Yes, we've even had some lenders fund the new entity as and just secure a new amortization on the same assets. So lenders that fund through, there are lenders that can maintain not only a sub note that is performing, but also maintain the deposit relationship, which can be very important, as we've seen in recent history.
Jason, Annette, do you guys have any thoughts on, or, Justin, other thoughts you might have as well on how, aligning these Lordy, I can't even speak today. Aligning these incentives can actually make your jobs a little bit easier as well.
I think, from a lender's point of view, this is a new way of looking at this, because normally you look at, this is done under UCC Article 9, Section 310 or 610. And, you can do either a public sale or a private sale. And normally, you look at this as, well, this is the lender's remedy, upon default, and it's a way to foreclose. But this is actually a different way of looking at it, where this is a remedy. But if the lender is clearly undersecured, meaning you don't have to worry about value for other constituencies, then they can work cooperatively with the debtor, in finding a buyer, keeping the business going, and being able to, recover. You do have to comply with, the requirements of the UCC. So that usually requires a minimum notice of 10 days for both a public or a private sale. But in public sales, generally, the law has developed a 30-day notice required. But that still is a lot faster than other types of, sales that can be done. And it does, when you look at public or private sales, lenders cannot purchase the assets themselves unless they're of the type that are, basically easily valued in the market. That is just kind of a protection. So you also, look at that, but this is normally you're selling to a third party. So not an issue. So just making sure that you comply with that. The other thing that you think about too is what kind of assets these are too. Are these assets, because essentially the lender is foreclosing, are these assets that the lender wants to touch for even 5 minutes? There are certain types of regulated industries where that's probably not, the case, like healthcare facilities, environmental, liability or potential liabilities. But generally, really, what a fabulous idea to quickly get this done if for undersecured creditors that want an upside and want it done quick.
I'm just going to add on to that, Annette. Thank you. But with counsels on board and able to have the existing lender understand both the risk but also the reward of doing this kind of transaction, it really helps to get them on board for getting everyone, following a plan of attack for an Article 9 type of process, treating it like a transaction with higher recovery potential. It makes a lot of sense, especially, not just because of the type of the collateral, but the value of that collateral. I've been involved in in cases where the inventory was, literally considered size 20 shoe, all left feet. And so the recovery was deemed by the appraisal companies to be almost nothing. However, one of the major vendors wanted to take it over, put a little bit of cash in to create working capital. And as much as the lenders pushed me, I do recall to this day the lender telling me, I don't know this guy's plan. Why would I do this? And I said, why do you care? Because you're at zero, you're going to have no recovery. And the fact of the matter is, this is a supplier who's coming in and is going to feed new product into the company. If you maintain your collateral position on the other side of Newco, you have an opportunity to have something of value that starts to put you into a recovery position, hope note aside, which they agreed to. And I'm happy to report that that lender went from what was deemed to be a zero recovery to 100% plus fees. It added value. And certainly for those of us who were dealing with the old co, where we had judgment liens, we had every creditor and their grandchildren threatening the company. This was a real fire. And unfortunately, there wasn't the funds for a judicial process. There were very limited options. But the Article 9 resulted in a light switch and a process that was able to move rapidly and to stabilize the situation so that we could ensure that there was a business on the other side as soon as practical for their peak season. So it's definitely a very valuable tool when used right, and especially when all parties are on board.
Great, thanks, Jason. Maybe let's all kind of talk a little bit about, what kind of challenges you all face in your respective space. Justin as a banker on some of these deals, Jason as an FA, and Annette as typically creditors counsel, that the Article 9 can really help with. I don't know who wants to start, maybe Justin?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in. Well, Jason, no question but that, from a bank's perspective, you're almost always in a better position selling a going concern than liquidating collateral, especially if they're all size 20 left foot shoes. So, that's something that's always attractive. And very often, as in the example that you were talking about, Jason, we're talking about borrowers that are in dire liquidity positions, and therefore, little time before the operation stops entirely. And so here you have a cooperative process, and because it's cooperative, and you have the Article 9 structure around it, one can move very quickly.
Well, and I'm sure you're somewhat concerned as a banker as well. Am I going to have to lend more money to keep this thing alive?
Right.
You don't want to lend more money after more new money after bad money. So,
No, that's right.
I'm sure that's
and
one of your considerations.
Indeed. And these are credit facilities that generally are not initially structured, or were not initially structured as, ABL credits. And so you don't have the protections, let alone factoring accommodations, for example. It's not as if you're, as a bank, generally in a position to continue to lend into situations where the risk profile is increasing significantly.
Annette, any thoughts on that as a creditor representative?
Well, I think one of the things, that we've touched on is when the secured lender is undersecured, this process of winding down, restructuring, basically is being paid for by the secured creditor. And so
Right.
when you look at the options of, how to restructure, bankruptcy does give, finality, and important finality in certain instances, but it's tremendously expensive. And basically it's going to be the lender who is paying for that. And it's also uncertain in its timing and even in its result. So there's a lot more, ability to predict, the outcome, and to make sure you understand, the expenses of it in doing this in this way, in an Article 9 restructuring. So it also gives, an upside. I mean, you can work with the buyer, you can keep the business going, and hopefully recover on your deficiency down the road.
Annette, you're absolutely right with respect to your comments, in particular on bankruptcy, which, as you move down sort of the size continuum to, from large corporate middle market, lower middle market, becomes less and less attractive because of its cost relative to the debt.
Exactly. This is a really good solution for middle market and lower middle market companies in particular.
Agreed.
Very much.
Jason, any thoughts on some of the things you face as a financial advisor when you get called into some of these situations? That doing an Article 9 may be the best option for you, or how it could benefit you as a financial advisor?
It's highly beneficial, and as everyone has said so well, it really does create a brand new company. I don't want to use the term fresh start, but it does give a bit of a fresh start, depending on the narrative. How did it get here? Is the company truly viable? Did it have some hiccups? Did it lose a customer? To the point that Justin was also talking about, is it a rationalization or a ratcheting down of the business model to support a new revenue, for example? All of these things make Article 9 very attractive. There are things that it doesn't work as well on if you've got 15 landlords or healthcare, to Jeanette's point, which certainly we've encountered. But by and large, when you're dealing with an operating company who is literally at death's door, and you don't have time to even consider Chapter 11, certainly, the Article 9 process provides a much more rapid mechanism, especially with everyone involved, to work through the situation, to ensure that the primary creditors are able to be addressed or even given special considerations so that they're engaged in continuing to support the company. There's a lot more positives than not to use the process for a company to survive and to continue to operate, for sure. It is definitely one of our go-tos.
And then Jason, as you see the NewCo on the other side, how does that kind of help you? Maybe they still have operational issues, or, they still have financial management issues, but you've got, now a new company that has, a new asset-based loan probably in place, subordinated debt below it, but doesn't have, the burden of as much debt as they probably had before. Then how do you look at your ongoing?
True. So I was using the term fresh start, but as Justin will say, looking at two companies' balance sheets, old co with about $10 million of payables and new co with about $1 million of payable. Yeah. One of those looks a lot more attractive and starts to fit the credit profile for getting back on the line and being a bankable transaction, or at least within a certain period of time in order to get there. So it does make it more attractive. Certainly it then becomes more opportunity presents itself for refinancing or for investment or for sale of the company. All of these things add a lot of value in order to make the company more attractive for those options, which reduces the bank's exposure as well.
No question about it, Jason. And there's there's also the consideration here with respect to the issues, of course, that Annette brought up with respect to the nature of the collateral, but setting that aside, and these are negotiated deals, a proposal as the incumbent lender that's just not attractive enough for you to move forward. But assuming a reasonable negotiation process, if you can gain cooperation of all the parties here and put all these pieces in place, I have trouble coming up with a reason why a special assets banker wouldn't with this Article 9 structured exit construct.
And I would also add that as referred to, this gives an opportunity for the lender if you have a buyer that now has a better balance sheet, that you can actually replace a non-performing loan, lend to the new buyer, and have a performing loan on your books. So it does also give other opportunities for the lender to restructure its loan and replace it with a performing loan.
Certainly a safer mechanism for bringing new capital in as well for someone who's interested in putting money into the company and seeing it survive.
Yeah,
Adam, I think
absolutely.
one other interesting point that Justin kind of referred to, or maybe Jason referred to, was, talking about, maybe you had $10 million of payables before, now you're only, $1 million of payables in the new co. But can you talk a little bit, but maybe about how you can really customize this deal to make it work?
Was that directed at me?
To Adam. Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. So because Article 9 is an extrajudicial process, the parties can negotiate, and do what is in the best interest of the incoming purchaser. So if that means coming in and addressing certain key vendors in order to secure a supply chain or whatever may be needed to preserve the ongoing concern, you have the flexibility to do that within the payables base. So it's more of a scalpel here than it is a sledgehammer, but it does allow you to remove excess unsupportable debt while preserving key vendor relationships in the new entity to assure that the going concern isn't damaged by that process.
Jason, you can weigh in too. I know I cut you off there for a second, but you might have thoughts in terms of, how do you make sure that you've got all your vendors in line and, continuing to supply Nuco or whatever. So
Adam covered it very well, but to the point, it's buyer's rules or investors' rules. The party who is coming in and is the owner of Nuco, who is the party that is establishing the Nuco, who is on the other side of that transaction, they do get the license to decide that these 10 creditors are the most integral creditors for this company's continued operation, and they can have that discussion with them and let them know that there's no mandate that says as unsecured creditors that there's any amounts owed to them. However, the buyer wants to have that relationship with them. The buyer wants to keep them working with them. That buyer wants to get credit terms out of the gate for the new company with them. There's ways to incentivize and negotiate, but also to be wearing that white hat coming in for a solution, not the black hat of the closure of the company. Something which in bankruptcy, and I'll defer to Jeanette and John if they want to comment on that, which takes time, effort, and the critique of whether or not someone has passed the sniff test of being a critical vendor for that kind of a process, and what that looks like. It's definitely a much different process and subject to scrutiny and court rule versus a party who's coming in and essentially buying assets through a foreclosure process and determining who are the most important parties that they need to keep working with to ensure that business is uninterrupted and faster.
thank you. Thank you. I think that's helpful. Let me stop here for 1 second and give the first code, which is TMA Education 2025. Again, TMA Education 2025. That's the first code for those of you seeking educational credits. So, I know we had a question come through the chat, and I wanted to get to that, but I knew we were going to cover it. So here, let's talk about some obstacles that may make enrolling the parties more difficult, or maybe some people might be more concerned about. So if anyone wants to jump in on some of the different issues that arise, or concerns that people have or lenders may have or whatever, if we want to jump into some of that.
I'll go ahead and start and just say, the advantage of Article 9 restructuring is the expense and kind of the speed of it, but it also is an out of court restructuring. So sometimes you do need a court order, and that gives protection, the lender to the buyer. So depending on the circumstances, there might be a situation where you might need a court order or court supervision. Like I previously mentioned, certain regulated industries like healthcare, you'd want, the lender does not want to take those over for even 5 minutes. There also might be environmental liabilities or other liabilities like that that you need a court order to sort out and protect, both the lender and the buyer from it. Sometimes there's successor liability concerns. If you can't really know the value easily of the collateral that's involved, there could be fraudulent conveyance, risks that you can minimize if you go through bankruptcy and get a court order and a process. So those are some of the things that you have to kind of think about. What assets are you selling? How easily are they valued? What kinds of problems, unique kind of liabilities or regulations does the company have to figure it out if this works, for the entity. And again, this needs to be a situation where it's clear that the lender is undersecured.
Well, I would add to that. It ties in some comments that Jason and Adam both made. As far as obstacles, boy, this is a negotiation, and that's kind of the good news and the bad news. Sometimes you can't come to an agreement. There's certainly the possibility that one or more of the parties that you're negotiating with isn't negotiating in good faith, perhaps. The good news, though, is that you can bring all kinds of creativity to the table, as has been discussed.
Yeah, and I would say that there are some best practices within the Article 9 to address things such as fraudulent transfer, fraudulent conveyance, and successor liability. Successor liability really comes to the arm's length transaction. So lenders can really take care of themselves by having incoming buyers sign arm's length affidavits prior to the sale as an inducement to do the transaction, so that if it turned out for whatever reason it was not an arm's length relationship, the responsibility would be borne by the purchaser. And fraudulent conveyance and some of these other items such as lender liability is addressed by having the borrower consent to the transaction and surrender. And fraudulent conveyance in a private sale is, again, Annette was very correct. If you have tangible assets that are easy to appraise, then you get an appraisal, and that has set the standard. When you get into things such as intangible property or trademarks or other, things that would have a little bit more of a difficult time valuing, sometimes you can pivot those sales to a commercially reasonable public sale in order to kind of dispel the risk of a potential fraudulent transfer claim, leveling the playing field for all interested purchasers. That being said, there are, I think Jason said it before, this is and has been a buyer's game for a number of years now, and so there is just some times where, based on the likelihood of litigation going into the transaction, knowing all the parties involved, maybe there's a seller financier, maybe there's an angry landlord, maybe there's a specific thing is going to come on the other side of the transaction. Purchasers can certain times just want a process that goes through the court because it does provide finality to it. And so it kind of comes, you got to weigh the good with the bad, right? If that court process costs you X amount more, what is the more efficient path to both acquiring the assets and litigating the matter? Is that done in a bankruptcy, or is that done in an out of court process with maybe a litigation budget on the other side of it, knowing that you did it properly? But those are the obstacles that you face every time going into these negotiations, because at 50,000 feet, this looks like it can fit almost any fact pattern, but you got to zoom in a little bit more and do your due diligence to make sure that you really are aligning all four incentives. Otherwise, 3 out of the 4 doesn't work.
And that is what's key, right? It is certainly the value of the debt versus the transferred assets, but then the successor liability and the fraudulent conveyance, which to Justin's point, it's negotiation, it's assessment, but it's also, you know, preparing and making sure that you've passed all of those sniff tests, so to speak. But frankly, from my own experience over the years, even to the extent where there has been the necessity for a settlement with a very angry voice in the back of the room, it's usually been less than what a bankruptcy would have resulted in for costs.
And I would,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna, yeah, go ahead, Justin.
No, I was just going to emphasize one of the points that that Adam made is, you know, from a bank's perspective, certainly the cooperative nature of the transaction, you know, provides any number of protections.
And I also think what everyone is saying too is the process matters. So, you know, you look at the type of assets you have, you know, the situation you're in, making sure that the sales process is run well, whether you pick a public or a private sale, depending on what kind of assets you have, make sure you've done your homework, got appraisals as needed, you know, so running the process in a complete way is really important.
And which highlights, by the way, to my mind, the importance of bringing in an experienced group such as Second Wind, you know, to manage that very important process.
Agreed.
Why don't we switch? I think we've probably covered, you know, the basics. Why don't we maybe go to the hypothetical situation I think I shared with some of you so that people can see how maybe this process might play out. So I guess, Ashley, you can put up those screens. I'll read the basics here. We have a loan outstanding to the bank of $4.5 million, a $3 million line of credit fully drawn, and a term loan of $1.5 million secured by first position on all business assets. Company was purchased 2 years ago with the above financing and a seller note of $1.5 million secured by a second position on the assets. Company has fallen behind on interest payments, principal and interest payments. They've got 2 merchant cash advances, always a nightmare to deal with, totaling approximately $500,000. They lost their major customer soon after the purchase. They've replaced it with some smaller ones. Volume is still down though. Lower revenues, along with the rising interest costs, caused the company to have a sizable loss in 2023 of about $1 million. In the last quarter, the company has gotten back to break even. Vendors are stretched. Many are requiring cash in advance. Materials are not single sourced. The company and previous owner are well known and well connected in the community, a workout banker's nightmare. And loans have personal guarantees, minimal funds to invest. We've got receivables of $2.5 million, inventory of $2.5 million, and net book value of equipment of $1 million. So looks like we are probably under collateralized. So anyone want to kind of weigh in on their thoughts on, you know, what options the company might have or what you're thinking about?
Should I go, or is that too soon? Well, from an Article 9 standpoint, the way we would take a look at this is actually we'd start from the bottom down. So the MCAs are most likely to disrupt the flow of business. So we would make sure that company could safely enter into default to preserve those cash flows. And then we would work with the first position outstanding bank lender to do an Article 9 restructuring. Going through this with kind of a worst case scenario lens for now, not understanding what the market of this business would be. It looks like if we had an incoming ABL fund an Article 9 sale, just based off of the information that we have, it does look like the business is under collateralized, but not massively under collateralized. So depending on the advance rates they got on receivables and inventory, and what the forced liquidation value of their equipment might be, it seems like we're going to be, you'd have something coming in just short of $4 million, if by rough estimate, by an incoming ABL. So that would create a small deficiency from the first position bank. And we would identify a purchasing party, get an appraisal on the assets to make sure that the purchase price is for adequate consideration. We would present the bank with a buyout of, let's call it $4 million for the sake of conversation. And we'd work with a company like a KCP to see if there is a short-term track to make the other $500,000 performing over the next 18 to 24 months, so that the bank had an ability to cover the full recovery value. Assuming that all worked out for our purposes, we would then have the bank conduct a private sale Article 9, which would strip off the remaining amount owed on the $1.5 million seller note and the 2 MCAs, as well as reset the balances with all of the AP. And hopefully by bringing in the right asset-based lender and having the right purchaser, the new entity is properly capitalized and is carrying $4 million worth of debt, maybe 4.5, instead of the 6.5 to 7 it was carrying now, with the additional benefit of having better cash flow based on the reduction of AP. From there,
Go ahead.
no, from there, as part of, in order to incentivize the seller to do all of that, the purchaser would have come to some arrangement to either address the personal guarantees on the MCAs and the seller note, or maybe they got a job, or maybe there's an opportunity for them to work in the new company and earn their way back in.
Adam, I just wanted to make an observation as we're looking at this that I think is an important one, although perhaps it's it's very obvious to everyone. But as we look at the accounts receivable collateral in particular, and having been in a position to liquidate receivables of defunct companies before, there's a significant delta between the value of the receivables in a going concern scenario and the value of receivables in a liquidation scenario, certainly, which is an important benefit.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in this scenario, you have $2.5 million worth of receivables. If you haven't started, by the time you get a judgment and you're in
That's right.
position to collect those, it's maybe $1.5 million, and good luck collecting them all. Whereas if you can get someone as an ongoing concern, and those relationships are going to continue and keep paying, then you get an advance rate of 75, maybe 85% LTV, and you can pull almost $2 million out of the receivables alone. So just taking that one subset, you can get a multitude, and that's without any carry along piece in the new entity. It's just taking a look at that one class of asset. And that's really exemplified for accounts receivables, but the logic can be applied to inventory. Inventory value often goes to near zero, where in a going concern, it's not quite as true in equipment, depending on what it is, but there is that same logic is applied across most classes of assets.
Absolutely.
And I think, Adam, your comments too were, in noting that in this scenario, the secured lender is not massively undersecured. It's pretty close, and therefore, negotiating with the seller on the seller's note, including, other parties, like that is smart. And you can do
this
that.
This would be a tough one on a bankruptcy, I would think.
Yep. Would very definitely.
Because it's
So
above
right.
above the level for the sub 5.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So negotiating is, and out of restructuring and Article 9 restructuring, it's a good idea.
Jason, any thoughts how this might help you in terms of, particularly when you think about, the cash position of the company and you're already getting your vendor pressure, so you don't have a whole lot of room to do much with vendors, it seems like.
No, it doesn't look like there's a lot of room, and certainly with the merchant cash advances to Adam's point, getting that cut as soon as practical makes a lot of sense. But the Article 9 in this specific situation does make a lot of sense. The operation is almost seamless. Maybe there's only a couple of hours before the new company's, it's operating under that new company name. It takes a few weeks, of course, for the noticing, et cetera, but this is a very quick process to ensure with the scale down model, now that they've lost that customer, that they can continue to operate without the distraction of judgments and creditor threats. I mean, there's, what do they call it? They call it there is that moment where everyone realizes what's happened, and with all the communication you can do to the creditors, there's still going to be those 5 stages of grief for some of the creditor body, especially the ones that aren't being taken care of or aren't adding a value that's necessary for the continued operation of the company, or they can be replaced. And that's a vetting process that the buyer and has to understand very quickly, which, to the extent that they've got either a financial advisor or they've got smart operating people, no, this is a great candidate for Article 9, as Jeanette said, and it should move quickly with being able to operate.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I think that's the end of our first part. I think we've pretty much covered the basics that we wanted to get across there. So now I'll turn it over to Adam and Johnny to take us through the case that they worked on together. So Johnny, you want to start telling us about Namco Pools?
Sure. So that was a case, a client through the firm that, it's typically one of those, it's through the private equity or M&A guys. And obviously it was started to turn into a mess. So then they come to my office. And so we were, looking at it. So essentially Namco was a, pool supply store Northeast, and sort of in the kind of COVID boom of everyone, getting hot tubs and doing whatever, they had expanded pretty rapidly. I think Adam was like 20 plus locations at its peak. But then they hit the wall of post-COVID, sort of people pulling back or realizing that they maybe couldn't afford the hot tub they had got during COVID, or weren't using it now that they were back at work, or whatever the scenario was. And so Namco, started having real cash difficulties, but it had a good bones to the business. And so the big, was the way to get it to right size it. And so initially, obviously, the initial thought was, okay, Chapter 11, because there would, that would give you the ability to, reject leases and sort of shave off the underperforming stores, without real exposure. But we had a problem, and I'll kind of jumping ahead, and so I won't get into the problem yet, but, so we were thinking about ways that there were concerns with Chapter 11. And so I was actually, as Sally had alluded to at the beginning, was at the Northeast Regional, and was having a later evening cocktail with Bob Benazzi from Second Wind. And I was sort of, we always say we're not going to talk about work, but of course I started laying out a bit of the fact pattern, and, Bob, being the amazing salesman that he is, sort of hooked me into the idea. And it again, I, candidly didn't fully understand it as we were sitting there, talking about it, but we were looking for an alternate path, and it was an option. And so I think that was the sort of the trigger that then I think it was, less than a week or so later, I was, on a Teams or whatever meeting with Adam and them, and, started working through the mechanics, and the concern we had was, and it's not uncommon, and Adam can certainly address, because he's got obviously way more experience in these transactions, that, we had a parent entity that had done significant lending to the subsidiary, papered and everything, but obviously, that kind of a lending relationship, insider, so to speak, is going to, face potential difficulties in bankruptcy, whether it be from a creditor committee, U.S. trustee, or whomever. And so that was a huge concern, but we had and essentially the parent debt was second behind a traditional bank, that had a first position. And so I'll hand off to Adam for a minute, kind of say when we sort of connected first and then started mapping out the process with his team.
Yeah, so I had met Johnny at a few TMA events. We had a couple of dinners together, so it was actually the second time we got to work together. And when I first got the file, I was amazed by the variance in performance in these locations, and it became very obvious as to which ones were going to survive and which ones were not. And so it took a little bit of time with Johnny and his team to understand the winners and losers and who are the nice landlords and who are not. But I understood the concern of the secondary debt getting downgraded in potential Chapter 11 filing. And the first position bank was, in this case, properly secured. And the second position creditor was a friendly party at this point. So we thought an Article 9 would, from the secured side, the secured lender side, was a great fit. We had the two stakeholders, which was the first and second position. There were a few smaller things subordinate of that, but both of them are in theory enrolled in the transaction. And then we'll talk about it a little bit later, but as we got into it, we had to pivot strategies slightly, which is again a nice subset of the Article 9, because it's extrajudicial. If in that negotiation someone is not comfortable, or a bank's counsel is not comfortable, or whatever the case may be, you can often meet them where they are and still get to where you need to get to. It's just not as rigid as a bankruptcy filing. So once we lined up the Article 9 transaction, I thought this was great. And then Johnny told me that, like, we got to chase around like 12 landlords to do 12 lease negotiations. And so that part was a little bit less efficient than the actual Article 9 sale. But after herding a bit of cats, we were able to get them all together. And the company is, on the other side of it, is operating debt-free. The second position took a small loss, but didn't lose their entire investment. So they recovered about 80% of what was owed. The company is operating outside of its first position debt. It did carry some of that second position debt over to the new entity. And the business is operating and is profitable. The mistake they made was, as Johnny said, when money was cheap and interest rates were like 2%, everybody was pulling money out of their house and wanted a hot tub and a pool. When mortgage rates are 7 or 8%, nobody wants a mortgage or a pool, and they had to find a way to live in that new environment. And they had built out large footprint stores. They'd go into a Best Buy and fill it with hot tubs. So we had to work with them to kind of downsize, smaller footprint, higher density locations, higher demographics, and really pick the winners out and let those larger ones go. But the process fit very well, and working with Johnny's team, him and his partner Andrew were excellent.
And the senior secured lender got out at par, yes?
Yeah, the end result was that the senior secured lender got out at par. So we started working. The lender was NBT Bank. They're out of New York, and working with their special assets department was great. They were not experienced, but they understood the objective of what we were trying to do. They brought in an attorney who was really more seasoned in doing traditional liquidations under bankruptcy and other forms such as that. And he had a very hard time getting comfortable with the Article 9 transaction. Again, something we probably could have waded our way through, but we, in the effort of time and to preserve business value, we actually decided to have the second position buy the first position's note so that they could be taken out at par. And we had the bank watch us from the sidelines do this, so that maybe next time when we walk into NBT, they'll see what the street is. Which is one of the things, the lucky part about getting in. We were this close, but we wanted to catch the busy season for the business and the incoming purchaser. So rather than lose the business of the busy season, because it was a very seasonal business, we decided as a group collectively to take action and make sure the transaction happened.
Johnny, do you want to maybe talk about, you know, how you had to pivot a couple of times on different aspects, and how the process can be very fluid in terms of how that works, and how, you know, working with Adam, you were able to accomplish a lot of those goals.
Certainly, yeah, it was, and I think, you know, Sally, you mentioned, or somebody had said earlier about, you know, the process, and I think also the, you know, here there was sort of what was key, and I think with any of these would be that, you know, you have a structure, and, you know, so we had these set weekly, you know, Google Meet, because really you had all these different silos of people dealing with their independent issues, you know, so you sort of had the, you know, folks working with the, you know, the original entity to kind of do the location analysis, you know, and figuring out, because there was you know, to Adam's point, there were some that were clearly sort of dogs, so to speak, but then there were some that were kind of in the middle, and they were more contingent upon, okay, well, how receptive was the landlord? So you sort of again had these real, and I think that was the key to kind of having the teams both at my shop and there at Second Wind with Adam, that, you know, you had sort of concurrent activities going on, because really within those, you know, if, you know, we started banging heads with a particular landlord, and even if that was maybe a desirable location, you kind of had to pivot and say, okay, well, if we remove that one kind of from the modeling, you know, does that, you know, provide, you know, create too much of an adverse impact on the, you know, on the entity on the other side, you know? And so we kind of were, I believe Adam could probably attest to better, that there was sort of some ebb and flow of, was it 8 locations, 12, 13, back to 10 to 9. And then sort of as he was, you know, as Adam was discussing that we, you know, as we were sort of trying to push the thing through, and again, because time really was of the essence, because really the cash flow of the season was critical for this, you know, again, because of the industry and just for this transaction to make sense. And so, you know, we quickly kind of, you were able to shift and do a takeout of that, you know, of the bank in the first position. And that all, you know, happened within a matter of a couple days. And again, really, in my view, that fluidity and flexibility isn't present, right, in a Chapter 11, you know, sort of like.
We might have lost Johnny.
Cliffhanger.
Well, I guess Adam, maybe you can kind of talk about how you can be as flexible as, you know, you can time this. Johnny mentioned a little bit about, you know, seasonality and things, but you can time things that work best for all parties.
Yeah, I mean, it's the point of it is that there's not a time limit on it. It has to do with the patience of both the senior secured lender and the incoming purchaser. So if it makes sense, you do whatever maximizes value. So for, you know, a seasonal business, that means transacting on the business right before it's entering its historic business. It's a historical busy season. So if that's, you know, the great part about it is, and I think Annette said it earlier, there is a minimum notice period, but it does not mean that you only have 10 days to close an Article 9 transaction. You can start the notice period and extend closing to meet whatever is the best business terms. And when you do that, you maximize value.
Certainly highlights, you know, the ability to be creative in these transactions, this example.
Yeah, because I think another issue, you know, what we had, because we sort of, it took a little bit of time, I think, again, predominantly with the landlord situation, we ended up, you know, having a couple of litigations get commenced, you know, so we sort of had another silo or whatever you want to call it, with trying to kind of manage those and sort of kick the can with those as well. And so it was you know, kind of another moving part to the puzzle. But again, one that, you know, you had to Justin's point, just, you know, the flexibility to deal with it. You know, and then eventually with those litigations to be able to present the materials from the Article 9 to say, hey, you know, there's unfortunately there's nothing here, and, you know, actually we're successful in getting those, you know, dismissed by the various landlords.
Did you guys have thoughts about public versus private? I mean, what were your thoughts as you kind of explored that?
So we were thinking private because we knew the identified party from the beginning, and based on the valuation of the assets from a forced liquidation standpoint, the assets came in far undervalued on, if you considered the second position. And so there was not a party that was going to pay any higher than that. So that it was obvious we were maximizing value. That said, due to the inexperience of banks counsel in this transaction, we did offer to do a public version of the Article 9 because it more aligns with that traditional sale process that, you know, historical practitioners have done. And that's why I say we got this close, because that version of it was as close to comfort as the lender was going to get to. But by the time that happened, with the additional notice period and marketing, we were going to be eating into enough of the busy season that's where we pivoted and made the adjustment. So we did do it, not because it was optimal for the transaction, but as an enrollment tool to enroll somebody who had no experience in running an Article 9 period, never mind a private version of the article.
Yeah, and I'd say one other consideration on the front end side that we had was with this particular, with the company was, a desire to avoid, some of the negative, bankruptcy impact, so whether it was on, asset values, public sentiment, whatever you want to call it, that was a key, just, given kind of the competition within the industry, that was another kind of a big factor when we were, considering this path versus a traditional, Chapter 11, that was a kind of a key driver that, they really wanted to avoid, that aspect as well. Again, because to Adam's point, there was already a bit of a, kind of gap there, right? Deficiency in terms of the secured debt versus the assets. And so we didn't want to obviously harm that further, with kind of the negative bankruptcy impact. So.
And I'm sure the cost of a bankruptcy when you're looking at, a number of locations and all those things is a thought consideration as well.
Yeah, for sure. Again, given the sort of, asset base, and revenues of the entity, versus sort of the geographic footprint, being in multiple states, it would have been I don't know if say cost prohibitive, but certainly close. I think it's where it wasn't going to make sense. Where this path we were, able to do it, and I don't want to give percentages, but substantially less cost without question, from 11.
Annette or Jason, you guys have, or Justin, you guys have any thoughts about how all that process played out? How you would have felt had you been in it, or, how you think the outcome, went throughout?
Well, one thought I had was, in talking about there were like 12 leases. I think people immediately think, oh, got to file bankruptcy so we can reject them. And, really the process of negotiating them, particularly when there are, I mean, obviously if there were 300 leases, you'd be in a different situation. But, where there is at least a kind of taking a different look at it, say, well, it may be easier but more expensive, but we can negotiate these and figure out a solution. I think that was, really a good point in this.
Kathy, or excuse me, Sally. Yeah, just to answer your question, I would have been thrilled with a par and no sale. Thrilled.
Keep the bank happy,
Yes.
always the game. Yeah, no, to Ned's point, because we actually had, and Adam, I forgot, there wasn't a lot of common ownership either between the landlords of the various locations. So it wasn't like we sort of had a large conglomerate that had, it was, a lot more sort of mom and pop or local type landlord. So, and again, that was a key component of working with, Adam's team, was that there was almost sort of a dedicated group that was sort of strictly running the lease component of this, And so that's like I say, it was great, it was sort of going on concurrently as we were sort of dealing with, the Article 9 itself and the sale process, and obviously all the note purchase and all of that kind of was all, again, sort of happening concurrently, so it was definitely requires a team for sure, but it was certainly worked out in the end, not unlike a lot of my cases probably.
In this particular case, I gotta shout out a bank when they do a good job. NBT did get landlord waivers on all of the locations that gave them an exorbitant amount of time to come pull their stuff out. So in an Article 9 where we bought the first position at post-COVID large footprint retail locations. I mean, it was largely the perception of choice. It is, do you want this place to be vacant and dark for 6 months to a year? Or do you want a tenant with a rent check starting next month? So it was a lot of phone calls, but I mean, the negotiations, it was more like, you know, checkers. It wasn't chess. It was a little bit simpler than that. Everybody, those interests are aligned. There are times, you know, if you're in downtown Manhattan trying to get, you know, leases for retail spaces, this would have been a little bit more of an uphill battle. But the location of leases and the timing and largely the way that the length of time they had under landlord waiver agreements made the negotiations with the 12 individual landlords time consuming, but not overly complicated. A lot of paper going back and forth that allowed one of my team to do that. Well, Johnny and I worked on the actual restructuring with the senior secured lender and answering all of the questions of the buyers and sellers, which were, you know, as you all know, working in distress, numerous and frequent.
So I wanted to make a general comment on top of what everyone said about leases, because, you know, by and large, when people have come to me and we've talked about lease issues, especially in Article 9, you know, that is a barrier to entry on occasion, depending upon a number of factors, right? Number one, are the leases and the landlords the reason why they're in trouble? Is it an affordability perspective? Are there Herculean arrearages here that have to be addressed? And, you know, you start that process of whether or not you can even pursue an Article 9 by looking at that landlord composition and starting with your Goliaths and ending with your Davids. Who are the parties that need to approve this, and on what terms, and are they affordable? Again, negotiation, to Justin's comments earlier, and creativity. I find that the post retail apocalypse world of 2020 does lend landlords, especially as you see so many landlords now owning retail shops, even creating holding companies for them. They're open to the concepts of negotiation to keep a tenant and to keep lights on in a space. Doesn't mean it's perfect. Doesn't mean it's viable. But to the point, are the landlords the reason that the company is in the state it's in? Do you need better terms? Do you have landlords who are willing to come to the table and settle with you? And frankly, if you have one holdout and it's not that big a deal, is it something that can be addressed on the other side of an Article 9 and you can use that process to exit anyway? So it comes down to the details for sure. I think that there is a different audience, and to the extent that it's a manageable group, again, going back to some of the things Jeanette said at the beginning of this, you know, it's affordable and it's worth those 12 phone calls.
Let me stop right here and give the second code for the educational credit. It's Article 9 sale. Article 9 sale. Anyone else
number
have?
or 9 spelled out?
It's a 9 number.
Exactly.
So anyone have any other comments about that case? And then I think we can go to see if we've covered, if no one has any comments they want to make to that case, we can go back to the questions and see if there was anything else.
So just one last.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Annette.
I was just one other thing I was thinking about again on kind of, you know, since it's negotiated, you deal with the landlords, is also your critical vendors, because this was mentioned before. But, you know, again, in a Article 9 restructuring, you can figure out what is really important to this business and negotiate for those vendors to be taken care of. You know, in a bankruptcy, the law differs from circuit to circuit on this, and it's really difficult, you know, to manage. So those kinds of issues, thinking about what's important in allowing this business to succeed, you know, and maintaining a value is important, is part of this, the genius of this process.
Yeah, and there's a lot of genius in this process. I agree. You know, the comment I was going to make is just to emphasize again, you know, as we talk through the complexities of this example here, of the importance of having experienced advisors. Because, you know, even in this example, we talk about bank counsel. not being familiar with this process, and maybe not being particularly familiar with a traditional Article 9 process, but that was able to, be overcome because of, those issues, because of the strength of the other advisors here.
I think I'm looking at the questions that have come in the chat. I think we've addressed the successor liability issue. I think we've dealt with the non-critical vendors versus unsecured creditors. Document the deal to anticipate a claim for fraudulent transfer. I think we've covered on that as well. There's a question about needing appraisals to do the Article 9. Are the appraisals to be done on a going concern value for the enterprise or liquidation value of assets for the comparison?
So I'll jump in and answer that. The base appraisal that you need is forced liquidation value on assets. However, depending on the situation, you may also get a going concern value for the enterprise. The idea is you're trying to run a process to maximize value and try to get more than just asset value, whether that's through a sub note in the new co or just having the new co pay a higher value. So in that process, it sometimes can make sense when courting buyers to show them what the minimum entry price is and what the actual value is. And if you have multiple parties within that space, that's how you kind of try to price up these transactions. So the requirement is a forced liquidation value on assets, but depending on what you're doing, would be how you're trying to maximize value. An enterprise going concern valuation can also be relevant.
Okay. There's also a question, what happens to personal guarantees, especially on MCAs?
I'll do this one as well. This is typically part of the debtor incentive package. So if you understand that there are personal guarantees, most sellers want some sort of resolution in that. So the current debtor may have some sort of earnout or something that allows them some budget of funds out of the new entity to help solve personal guarantees. Article 9 is just a disposition of collateral, free and clear, done under the Uniform Commercial Code. It does not address personal guarantees of subordinate debtors. Those are individual settlements. In certain cases, it then does make sense for the individual guarantor to file a personal bankruptcy now that the business has been handled in an Article 9 sale, depending on just the sheer volume of personal guarantee debt and their personal exposure. But if there is a path to reasonable settlement, that's part of that prepackaged nature, that the current guarantor has a path out of their personal guarantees, whether that's in part or it's subsidized in portion by the incoming purchaser. Purchaser is usually getting below an enterprise value entry on the business that they're trying to acquire. And so they're sharing some of that benefit with the seller in order to incentivize them to do the transaction. So I will also expand upon it. I'm not an attorney here, so I'm going to go a little too far. I'm going to ask, Annette to maybe not look at me too angrily. But MCAs, most of them don't actually have a true personal guarantee for performance. They have for payment, they have a personal guarantee for performance. So if, let's say an MCA purchased 12% of future receivables and they receive 12% of future receivables all the way up to the Article 9 sale, you technically performed on that because there are no future receivables and they received the portion of future receivables that they purchased. So you can try to, if you do an Article 9, you can hire an attorney and try to challenge the fact that there would even be an MCA personal guarantee. But in often cases, the size of MCAs are small enough to where the path is actually cheaper to settle with them than it is to litigate over the matter.
Well, I would add too that when you have guarantees, I mean, a lot of these smaller businesses, the guarantors are the owners, and a lot of their value is tied up in this business. And so when you value the guarantees and whether you should pursue them separately, a lot of times getting cooperation and will give the lender more value in the end, working with them through an Article 9 restructuring.
It looks like we've got another question. How have panelists typically handle the appraisal issue for private sales where the collateral is equity interests that are not sold on a recognized market? Is a market check simply the only option in these scenarios from your perspective?
In my perspective, we try to find, there are a lot of specialists who specialize in appraising what I would call odd collateral that doesn't have a clear market value. If you can't find someone you're confident in that's going to stand behind their value, then I would pivot towards a public sale. You create a stalking horse, you make a commercially reasonable effort to market it, and you let the market dictate the value rather than guessing and doing a private sale and exposing yourself to potential fraudulent transfer, successor liability, and all the things that come with it. So I would make a really concerted effort to try to find somebody who could put a value behind it. And if you can't do that, then I would pivot to a public transaction.
Does the free and clear also deal with mechanics liens?
Before you get into that, one thing I was going to add, actually, Sally, to tag on to Adam's comment is when you can't get an appraisal, when you can't get a valuation, and we can all talk through the subjectivity of those, the offers and the attempts to try and do market transactions is always very helpful, and it's a good track record to point at if challenged. So if you've already tried to make an effort and you've gotten 10 offers, you've touched 40 people in the meantime, it gets really hard to argue that that's not a value. Go ahead.
Again, does free and clear also deal with mechanics liens?
Mechanics liens typically fall on real property. And this is Article 9, for the most part, does not cover real estate. So this is the only application of Article 9 within real estate is if actually real estate is held in an LLC and the LLC's membership interests are pledged as collateral. You can use Article 9 as a way to foreclose on the membership interests rather than going through the lengthy foreclosure process. But outside of that, it does not really have an application on commercial real estate. So the short answer to that question is that even in that one use case where you can foreclose on membership interest, that would not remove a mechanics lien. Only a true foreclosure on a piece of commercial real estate would accomplish that.
And I would just add to that the reason that you get a free and clear situation is because the secured creditor, who is the senior secured creditor, who is foreclosing under Article 9. So obviously, if there are some kind of liens that take prior to the senior secured creditor, you're going to have to deal with them in an Article 9 foreclosure. They're not going to get wipes out junior liens.
Mm-hmm.
I think the last question we've got that I see anyway, at what point is second wind engaged? So not sure if they're talking about in the case of Namco or typical.
Like one of our situation, I think after I had the intro discussion with Bob, I think maybe in the short week, the next week after, I think I had sort of had the explanation call, I call it, with Adam and his team to kind of walk me through it. And I think, within that next week, because I spoke to the client and laid it out, and again, given the sort of real, concerns with the second position debt, was really a controlling factor. And so as soon as I kind of understood this process from the tutorial and could lay it out to the client, they jumped on, quickly. So at that point, they hadn't, in terms of timing, they hadn't really engaged with any of the landlords yet, in terms of any plans or, closures or anything of that nature. It was still all, early stage that we got Second Wind involved and then initiated kind of the outreach and other efforts.
Yeah,
Does that
so
sound right,
do I.
Adam? I think that was right, right?
Yeah, that
Or
was
did I make
that
that
is
up?
correct. And
I
John
couldn't
did
remember.
a
It's been a
great.
little while.
Yeah, it has been a while.
Yeah.
Like any turnaround professional or advisor, the sooner we get in, the more value we can preserve. Can we come in at the last minute and preserve what's there? Sure, but I always, I don't go a day where I don't talk to somebody that's like, I wish we started this 6 months ago. So do I, but so the answer with all of us, I guess, across the entire TMA is the sooner the better.
Well, and I can say that since I was introduced to this concept, working with Adam at more than a decade ago, I always had this construct in mind as distressed C&I loans, come into the special assets group. And I'm always, initially evaluating them for potential suitability for this Article 9 structured exit construct.
Everybody,
Sally, we
I
do have
thank you,
a question.
everybody, because, I'm sorry,
We have one more question.
I don't think so, do we?
Said, if unsecured creditors file an involuntary bankruptcy petition during the sale notice period, will the petition block or delay the sale? In theory, yes. In practice, it doesn't really happen because the creditors that are in the money on the assets are part of the transaction. So that would require 3 creditors who are fully unsecured to put up the legal fees to file an involuntary bankruptcy, to then just force the business into another insolvency process to which they wouldn't get paid because they're not in the money. So I've been doing this for 15 years. I've not had an involuntary bankruptcy stop a single Article 9 sale. I've had people say those words, but no one act on them.
Okay, I think that we've taken up all of our time. Thank you, everyone on the panel. Truly appreciate all of your engagement and your time and efforts in getting this done. So really appreciate that. Appreciate everyone listening in. Please don't forget to fill out the survey form in the chat, which will also be emailed to you if you're seeking educational credit. So look forward to seeing many of you at the next event. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dolly.